Welcome to Real Talk about Real Marketing, an Acxiom podcast where we discuss marketing made better, bringing you real challenges and emerging trends marketers face today.
I want to welcome our listeners today to our first on-location setting for Real Talk about Real Identity. And this is really a monumental moment because we, after having spent about, 2 years now doing the podcast, we've really recognized that identity is such a influential and foundational component of marketing as a whole that we're now going to open up the aperture of our podcast, and we're really rebranding now to Real Talk about Marketing.
Yeah, that's right, Kyle. And I think you all as listeners have probably kind of sensed that we've really focused identity on marketing the entire time. Identity is a broad topic. You can talk about identity as in identity from social security number, government IDs, IAM, and really, I really feel like we focus a lot more on helping brands reach their customers and see identity kind of through that marketing perspective. So really excited to kind of expand kind of the conversation, and what better person to have as a guest on the show today than Tammy, Ammon, who honestly is kind of leading Acxiom's branding and is in essence the face of Acxiom from that perspective. Tammy, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience and tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Tammy, Ammon, and I head up the thought leadership and research practice at Acxiom. So that means we're looking at what is our story, what is important to clients, who are we, and how do we show up in the market.
Yeah. So Tammy, certainly brand is the outward kind of perspective of a company to the broader market. Why is that so important?
I think your brand is really your calling card, right? It is about building trust, and it's really important, especially when you think about for your sales teams, right? So we're in the B2B space, we're a B2B company, we serve B2C companies. It's important for salespeople to have a strong brand that they're taking out to the market, because what we're doing is we keep them from having to make that first introduction, right? So if people know who we are, they know what we're about, they have a positive perception of Acxiom, then when our salespeople come to help our clients solve their problems, they can skip that whole introduction step, right? Because we've already sort of built that positive brand equity. And the other thing that's really important to remember about brand is that at any given time in the B2B space, about 95% of your customers are not in market at that one given moment, right? They're either in an existing contract, they may not even know of the tool they need just yet or the solution they need just yet. And so 5% are in market at any given time. So what we like to say is brand is future demand. So if we can help you understand who we are and what we bring to the market, then that's going to help our sellers go out and help our clients.
Yeah. So Tammy, how would you identify Acxiom? What is Acxiom's identity? What is our brand?
Yeah, so Acxiom is interesting, right? Because we are a legacy brand. We've been around over 55 years now. I think one of the biggest things about Acxiom is that we're very, very trustworthy. We have a huge legacy in data ethics and data privacy, and we deliver for our clients, right? Over 96% of our clients renew. They stay with us because they know when we say what we say we're gonna do, we do, right? And so that's really exciting. But I think the other thing about Acxiom that we don't highlight enough and that we will be highlighting coming in the future is innovation, right? Acxiom has evolved. Think about 1969 when Acxiom started, right? We were just putting a man on the moon for the first time. So Acxiom has seen a lot and been through a lot, and I think a lot of times we undersell ourselves because we don't talk about that great innovation that we have. We don't talk about that we're kind of always there solving problems, looking ahead. And so in this moment, in the AI revolution that we're in, what we do is so important. It's so critical. So I think that's where we'll really lean into. I think the other thing we'll want to do is be bolder and simpler. You guys know better than anyone. Our industry is complicated, and it's really easy to get lost in the tech and in the buzzwords. So our opportunity here is to be bolder, to cut through, and to be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great. And just from a personal example of that, I was just recently at a partner event with Databricks, their CIO summit, and it really was a value, even for me, just as a participant, with the Acxiom brand, because I could go up and meet a lot of people that I'd never met before. And as soon as I said, well, I'm with Acxiom, there's immediate recognition not of myself, but of the
Right.
brand and understanding what we play in the market, and it really just helped open up that. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
great point there about just your brand being that calling card.
That's right.
That really brings people in.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, there's kind of an expectation that when you get branding right, it goes before you. I can walk in and, Kyle and I, it was tough. It was painful for us to move off from identity and branding to marketing, but it was a true fact. But the thing is, Acxiom's brand it rests a lot on identity. So when we
That's
go
right.
into a room, like, people are expecting to hear the best in that topic, that have subject matter expertise. So it's absolutely, I feel like that's a key part of brand messaging, right? To protect it, to lift it up, to get it out in front of people.
Right, and you have to know where you are, right? Like Salesforce is another great example of a brand too. They've kind of embraced this, the kind of the cartoon characters. When you see that looks and that feels like Salesforce. And so they're another great example of a brand who is really leaning into who they are. And I think consistency is the other thing that's really important.
So for our listeners, take us back. What is a example of maybe a brand that missed the mark at some point?
Yeah, so as a kid of the 80s, my favorite one is New Coke, right? So, I feel like the miss in New Coke was that they're a legacy, right? They're a legacy and they have something that's really amazing and great, but they missed what it was that their customers wanted. And their customers wanted some change and some innovation, but they didn't want to mess with what was working so well. And I think they're a great brand that, has learned from it. They've moved on, right? You see they're very diversified, right? Specialty waters and specialty drinks and all of those things. But they didn't lose the core of who they were. And I think they learned that in the 80s, right? Which is they kind of can't mess with what's beautiful and great about their brand, but they can also still innovate, but they have to do it in the right way. And so I think that's a great example of a brand who, we can all laugh and chuckle. We all tried New Coke. Wasn't that great, but they've come back from it. So I think they're a great example.
And then on the flip side, I know earlier we were talking, you had a brand that kind of came to mind where they're getting it.
Yeah, so it's a small brand. It's called Print Fresh, and it's a brand that I particularly love. They targeted me very well on Instagram, right? So they found me lots of whimsical prints. They started in like the pajama space, and then they've gone into home goods and clothing and things like that. And what is special about them is that they build a community. So they understand who their customers are, they understand what we like, they ask us to participate, and they really turn you from being like this loyal Print Fresh person to an advocate. And when you think about that, like how many sets of pajamas does one person need? But with Print Fresh, you want the latest, you want the greatest, you want to get all of their latest prints. And so what I think is really special about them is the relationship that they're building with their customers for something that seems kind of, table stakes or that you could get anywhere. And they're really building a community around it.
Awesome. So Tammy, like the marketing industry itself is experiencing so much volatility, so much disruption, more so than I think almost any industry.
Right.
GDPR regulations, CDPs hitting, AI, all these things. When does a brand start considering changes like that it needs to like maybe freshen its identity or start considering new things? When do you think that's appropriate, or is it more appropriate to keep anchored in what you've always been?
I think it's something you're always looking at, right? So I don't think there's a moment in time where you say, oh, now we're going to look to see what's happening and if we change. In marketing industry, it is crazy complicated. It is changing ridiculously fast. So I think it's got to be part of your practice and something you're always doing. So something that we do at Acxiom is we actually do what's called a brand health study on the regular, right? And we go out to the market and we try to understand what people understand about us. What do they think about us? What are their impressions of us? Would they consider us? And that's where you start to get those real insights. So I think with brands, it's really important to always have a little bit of a research budget there where you're getting outside of your own four walls, so to speak. So you're thinking about, what do people really think about you and what are they really considering about you? And in our industry, I think you always have to be thinking about that. But I do think there is a tendency sometimes to go for the shiny object. So I think it is a balance and you kind of always have to have that, really understanding where you're, like, what is the core, what is the bread and butter, how do you evolve that, and then what do you bring in new that's complementary to that? And that's, where your product organizations are so critical.
Right. So if we could just transition for just a second.
Sure.
Because your title kind of is encompassing some brand things and also thought leadership.
That's right.
So talk to us about thought leadership, like within the marketing ecosystem. Why is that important, and kind of how does that manifest itself at Acxiom?
Yeah, so I think thought leadership is interesting, right? Because it's a big, broad term, and you see it everywhere. And I think a lot of times it's like, oh, I have to say something that's never been said before, that's never been thought of before. And that's pretty tough in today's world, right? But I think what it is thought leadership is taking those things that have worked, those lessons that you've learned, and you're applying them to the future. And you're thinking about where you could go, and you're thinking about what's coming next. So at Acxiom, we have built a thought leadership practice that we're really proud of. And so twice a year, we come out with our own proprietary research. So in the fall, around November, we come out with our customer experience trends, right? So we're looking ahead, what's happening. It's trend season, where is that going to be? And in the summertime, we come out with Acxiom as leader in customer intelligence. So we come out with research around what's happening in the customer intelligence space. How can our clients and how can brands be thinking about how do they apply data? Do they have the right infrastructure? Do they have the right teams? Are they thinking about moving their business forward in the right way? So our research is really critical, because what that does is it gives us this outside perspective. It is proprietary research, and we really look at the market. So that's really important. That's a huge piece of our thought leadership practice. We also work with a lot of our executives to tell their stories out in the market, right? So we place those out in publications, we place them on our website, we do podcasts, we do all sorts of things to get the story out. And I think what thought leadership is really at its heart is just continuing the conversation.
So in our 2024 CX predictions, we really focused on AI. That was a big component of it. And for our listeners, we will link in the show notes to that report, so they have access to the report. What are we thinking on AI?
Yeah, I think what's exciting for Acxiom is that to make AI work, you need a strong data foundation, right? And so, again, as we said, Acxiom's a 55-plus-year-old company, but we are so positioned right now to help in this next generation of where we go, because it's about customer understanding. AI is amazing when you get it right, and it's also, frightening when you get it wrong. Like, there's plenty of headlines in both cases. And I think where Acxiom's sweet spot is helping with the data, the identity, and building that foundation of customer understanding to power this next wave of AI. So in our estimation, Acxiom is really at that forefront of looking at things like predictive personalization. What's going to happen there? What's going to happen with virtual reality experiences? All of those things we're looking at. How does data, how does identity, how does understanding your customer play into taking that to the next level?
Yeah. And, speaking of playing into the customer, it's like, I think it's super critical, right, that we empathize with the customers that we serve through our clients, right? And I think one of the core topics that we all have to talk about is governance, ethics, making sure that, people understand how we're leveraging data, and how you want to make sure that you have partners that you can trust. That trust element is so critical in the brand, right?
Right.
So, how do you feel like, our listeners should approach that, especially around AI? What should they be looking for? What should they be saying?
I think it's first and foremost, right, you've got to follow the rules, right? I feel like that's table stakes. But I think the other thing is really thinking about putting yourself in those customers' shoes. And so is the experience you're going to create for them, is it something they would expect? And if they don't expect it, is it going to delight them? Or is it going to cause, kind of consternation? Like, how did you get here? And so I think that's the thing you think about when you think about AI and data ethics and governance. It's doing the right thing. And I also think, too, you think about, remember when big data hit, right? It was all about like getting all the data you could have. And then there was so much data you didn't actually use. And you were paying to store it. You also have the security risk of just housing data that you weren't going to make use of. So I think with AI, it's another opportunity here to really make sure that the data you're collecting and that you're generating, you're using. And then thinking about that when you're using it, thinking about how can you delight a customer in the best possible way. I think that's what's going to take it, to the next level.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about AI, in particular, the data layer, the feeding of data in, certainly one of the challenges with AI, right, is hallucinations. That
Yeah.
this is an algorithm-based ecosystem that's just generating knowledge on its own in many cases. And we've seen, all of us, I think everyone probably has an example where they've seen it kind of go awry, right, and do that. And so certainly from Acxiom's perspective, early on, I thought like identity. Well, identity is a very challenging domain that AI doesn't immediately come in, at least generative AI doesn't come into play. Certainly machine learning we've been using for a long time and those aspects. But the aspect of getting the right information about the right people, and that doesn't necessarily mean the names and addresses, because, privacy and again, ethics, but associating the right data with the right people and training the LLMs or the different AI mechanisms effectively so that you're reducing that amount of hallucination is super critical going forward.
It is, and I think what we like to say is that, there's artificial intelligence, there's customer intelligence, which is understanding the understanding your customers and putting all of that data to good work. And then there's people intelligence, right? Which you need people to oversee this, right? You need strategy. You need to think about how you're putting these things to work. And so it's fun, we all kind of chuckle when we see things go awry, and usually it's a visual way that it goes awry, right? It's a funny picture. But I think it's important to, going all the way back to brand, right? Your brand trust and your brand safety. It's that, we really want people to understand that what you do with AI is going to affect your brand today and tomorrow. And while we work in marketing and technology and we're thinking about this stuff all the time, consumers are partially the way there with us, right? So if you look at some of the research that we did last year, we asked consumers, how many of you have tried using something like a chat GPT in your personal use or for work use? And so for personal use, it was about 50%, and work use is about 24%. And I'm sure that number's grown, right? But what is important about that number, what's really key, is that it means you have to bring consumers along this journey with you, right? And so they are not exactly where we are, all of them, right? And you have to remember that. And I think that's where transparency comes in. What are you doing with AI? How is it showing up? How are you making their lives better? So I think that's really key.
It really reminds me of from 2000 to 2010, the adoption of e-commerce.
Yes.
It's like you had early adopters, people who were like, man, yeah, if I can go online without going to the store and he just shipped to my, I'm in.
Right.
All about convenience, all about but then, you go to my parents' house and they're like, no way I'm giving my credit card.
Right.
Now it's it's pretty much mass adoption there, and we're kind of seeing the same thing, same patterns with AI, but I think it's only it's like a hockey stick, right? It's not going to take 10 years.
That's right.
To get mass adoption. I think it's one of those things that it's going so fast, and it's going to be so just revolutionary as far as like how humans interact with each other, how efficient you are. I just think that even our parents, grandparents, they might not know they're using AI.
That's right.
But they're,
so many experiences, right? I mean, one of our trends was shoppable ads, right? And so you talked about, hey, people wanted to, it took a while to get people to go from the store to, sitting at their computer at home, to a desktop. And now people are shopping on their phones and directly from ads themselves, right? And influencers are really driving that as well. Yeah. So we're seeing brands try things like that, and those things are powered by AI, right? The AI is, helping make those things possible.
Well, going back to the print fresh example you gave, right, where they found you on TikTok.
Instagram.
Oh, Instagram. Yes. All right. I'm not on either, so. But they found you in social, and that was a targeted effort, probably on their behalf. And then you were able to kind of click through, and then now you start to engage there first through some initial e-commerce, just making a purchase, and now you've got a relationship, and now we can see that flywheel just continue to turn.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really fun how they're doing it.
Well, I know we're kind of about time here, and so to wrap up, we always like to kind of throw some questions out there. as we've been talking, and we're talking AI, so obviously that's a big thing coming in the future. But from your perspective, what is one of the biggest changes you think is going to take place in the next 3 years in marketing?
I think it's going to be, obviously it's going to be fueled by AI, but I think it's going to be us trying to figure out the balance between technology and people. And so how do we bring AI in to help make us more efficient, to help make us, kind of take our creativity to that next level? So I think that's really what's going to be interesting, is when we figure out kind of that secret sauce between the technology and the people. I think that's really going to be the biggest challenge and what's going to be changing the most. I think the technology is fun, and obviously new technology and new versions of AI are going to be coming. But I think it's always going to be, how do we integrate that into our world? So I don't think it's like, oh, what's beyond AI right now? I think right now it's, how do we make this work for us in a really meaningful way?
Yeah, I guess one question I'd like to maybe end with is like, our listeners obviously are gleaning value out of this conversation. They're wanting some tactical, what do I do next? How do I know that I am, where I should be on the curve, the hype cycle, I'm applying these new cool things around AI with my brand, or being left behind? Like, what would you say to our audience around preparedness?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, don't be afraid. It's really easy to feel like you're behind. I mean, we're all behind, right? Meaning, it can feel like we're all behind. We're all running and chasing and learning new technologies. I would say just get in there and play. Don't be afraid. Try things like ChatGPT on your own, or there's a great tool called Perplexity AI that I really love. It's a search engine kind of tool, but it helps you find interesting stats and validate your point, right? And so, or help you validate the story you want to tell. So it's interesting. There's things like Microsoft Copilot, we're playing with that. There's, Adobe Firefly. So I think the biggest advice I would give to people is just play and approach it from that perspective of playful and curiosity. If you approach it from a place of fear, I just think you're not going to get that much out of it. But if you approach it from like what's possible and curiosity and work with it. We had a class with Shelley Palmer talking about AI and where we're going. And one of the things I loved is he said, if you're really good at your job, AI is going to help you be even that much better at your job. But if you're not great at your job, it's going to reveal that. And what I love about that is it means all of the hard work that we all put in to know our strategy and our audiences and our technologies can be enhanced by AI if we'll approach it from this place of curiosity.
Yeah, well, I love that, and love that aspect of not just curiosity, but play and play to win.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So want to thank you for being with us here today in this beautiful setting in Tucson, Arizona. Tammy, really been insightful, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and for all of our listeners, you can catch our episodes at Acxiom.com/Real Talk, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk about Real Marketing, an Acxiom podcast. Find all our podcasts at Acxiom.com/Real Talk or your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.